This is Trevor Kouritzin, your host of Evolutionary Radio. We are coming at you live from the Evolutionary Radio headquarters. As always, my co-host Steve Smee is joining me.
Hey, good evening, everyone. How you guys doing this evening?
We got another really good guest for you guys. We have Eric Helms, one of the founders of 3D Muscle Journey. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So Eric, I wanted to get you on. Obviously, you're a super smart guy. I feel like so many people in the fitness industry and just people getting started are so confused on where to start when it comes with their calorie intake, their macronutrient breakdown. You know, people thinking extremes. Like a lot of people think you have to do a 0 carb diet in order to lose body fat. You know, so what I want to pick your brain about, Eric, is let's say I sent you an email saying, you know, hey Eric, I've been following you on social media. I love your stuff. I want to hire you as a coach. I'm a male, I'm 200 pounds, I'm 6 feet tall. My goal is to build 10 pounds of lean muscle in the next 6 months. Where would you start? How would you get like a rough ballpark of my caloric intake, my macronutrient breakdown, things like that?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is I would just, and this is what we do, is we would just have them track their nutrition for a period of 2-3 weeks without changing anything, just to see what they're currently doing. Because the assumption that you can give someone your stats and that would tell you exactly what your nutrition should be in terms of macronutrients or calories is one that's pervasive. And you see a lot of people say that, but it's just not true. There can be a ton of variability. So the first thing we have someone do is we teach them how to use MyFitnessPal, and we get them just tracking till we see where they're at. You really shouldn't be changing things or giving someone advice if you don't even know what they're doing in the first place. So that's step one. And then that teaches the person a lot about what they probably are lacking or don't understand.
One question I have for you, Eric, is if you're dealing,
associated with, sorry,
you cut out a little bit there, Eric. But one question I have for you is if you're dealing, with the average person, do you run into issues like they might say for dinner, I had a baked potato, and add that to their MyFitnessPal, but not include the sour cream and bacon bits and butter or whatever else they put on top of it. Do you ever run into problems like that?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was alluding to, is that there is a learning curve associated with tracking. So you've got to, as a coach, teach someone the basics of what calories are and what the various macronutrients are and what actually needs to be tracked. So no, you don't have to track your water, but anything that might have calories needs to go on your MyFitnessPal. And ideally, you're going to get them to buy a body weight scale and a digital food scale. So they're going to be taking regular measurements and weighing things out. So they're going to give you a pretty good look into their nutrition, and you'll be able to help guide them through those things. Like, just like you said, if you see dinner and it looks like they ate a plain baked potato, well, unless they're just really very Irish, that's probably not the only thing they ate, and they probably put something on that, So it's a matter of talking to them and teaching them those skills so that they can get an accurate estimation of everything.
I'm going to say one more thing, and I'll let Steve jump in, because Steve, he's a man of opinions. One thing I was going to comment is that seems like quite a bit of work, especially for someone who's never followed, a fitness program before. Do you lose clients when you say, hey, for the first 2 weeks, I want you to log your food for me? Do you get email inquiries and then they kind of go, oh, that's way too much work, and you never hear back from them again?
If we do, that's to be honest, I think it's a good thing, because if someone is truly going to actually be giving us money on a monthly basis and asking us to coach them and help them make lifestyle changes, and for the most part, we're working with strength athletes and bodybuilders, they're going to be wasting their money if they can't track their nutrition for a couple weeks. Especially if they have our guidance and help in that in-docking period. Typically, if someone is willing to pay a coach to work with them on a week-to-week basis and report in every day, and they're unwilling or incapable of actually tracking their nutrition without even being asked to change it, it's not going to go well for them. It's going to be a waste of their time. They're probably not at the right stage of change with where they're at the point where they're actually going to be making significant changes. So I think it's important to use that period to assess your own level of commitment to your goals as well. Because if you're at the stage where you can't track nutrition even for 2 weeks without even having to follow a diet yet, then it may be that you're not quite at the point where you need to be hiring a coach anyway.
So my question, Eric, with this, how can you track exactly what someone is bringing in? Because, a lot of calories, can be off. You can be off 20%. These apps can be off up to 45%. So what is, that's my problem with whole, tracking calories and tracking macros, because I've tried that before with an app and stuff. And it just seems like, you're like, okay, I'm eating one banana, but I mean, a small banana can be 40 or 50 calories and a large banana can be 110 or 120 calories. And that adds up, for example. So what's the trick on that?
Oh, I think the trick is to understand the difference between reliability and validity. So validity is saying that you're actually tracking your calories accurately. And that doesn't matter nearly as much as whether you're tracking them consistently. So if you are making the same errors on a regular basis, a systematic error, and let's say you're actually eating 2,800 calories when you say you're eating 2,500, that's not nearly that big of a deal, because the adjustment you make as a coach is going to be a fixed value. Like, I'd like you to reduce your carbs by 25 grams, fat by 10 grams. We're going to add some cardio. And if we don't see consistent weight loss, we make an adjustment there. But a huge part of that is also just educating the client, teaching them, like you said, the difference between a small and a large banana, or better yet, just putting it on the scale so they don't have to make a visual assessment, and getting them the tools of the trade, if you will, so they get used to that.
Wait, I have a question. Like, who makes, like, let's say you get a chicken breast, who makes the rule that a chicken breast that weighs 1 pound is X amount of calories? Like, who makes that rule to begin with? And how do we know, like when they're adding oil or they're adding butter or they're frying it or, they're adding all this stuff to it, how do we, like, who makes the rule that says this chicken breast is this many calories? I'm trying to kind of understand that part.
Do you know how they calculate calories, Steve?
It's okay. I'm asking the guest, Trevor. I want to see what the guest says. I know I know what you're going to say, but I want to see what the guest says.
So they use what's called a bomb calorimeter, where they actually see the heat value in the food. And you can use databases that have been developed by the USDA or different government bodies where they've actually tested the calorie values in foods. And you can look at the research on this stuff. Like you said, there are errors. But when you're doing it accurately, we're looking at errors around maybe 10 to 20% with someone who's trained doing this. And they are errors in the absolute value rather than the reliability. So another way to look at it is the proof is in the pudding. We've had almost 10 years of clients getting on stage, very, very lean and making body composition changes. And it's a pretty proven track record of being able to get people to track their food, teach them a system and use it over time. But yeah, there's definitely errors. I mean, like food labels only have to be accurate by a certain amount. And you can definitely cook and prepare things different ways. So there's a question of, does it work? Which, yes, of course it does. Obviously, we've got lots of coaches and people who use this method to be successful. And then the other question is, well, what are its pitfalls and its shortcomings? And I think it's really good to be aware that you shouldn't be like if someone tells you, hey, I want you to drop 2 grams of carbohydrate, like that's just silly, because it's going to be off by maybe 10, 20 grams anyway. So having like ranges is a really good idea, instead of a fixed absolute value, and making a large enough change that that's actually going to result in a systematic reduction in calories or increase. So I think it's all what you do with the information. If you understand that
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Most of the clients that are coming to you these days, I'm just curious, most of them are American, or is it worldwide, or is it kind of a 50-50 thing?
Worldwide. I'd say we have worldwide as far as English speakers, obviously.
Okay, yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. Yeah. So would you say most of the people need to lose weight or gain that have come to you? Because I'm just curious, because we all know, I read a statistic a couple of days ago that 50% of Americans are at least 30% body fat. So, which I believe, if you walk around, I don't know if you live in the US, but I do. And we're a pretty fat country. So are most of these athletes coming to you that need to lose weight, cut more body fat, or is it more they're skinny and they want to bulk?
We get a mix. So we have two different pathways to coaching. We have our week-to-week coaching, which is typically for contest prep. So that's going to be almost exclusively, natural bodybuilders who are dieting for a show. And then we also do Skype consultations or Skype programming where we meet with someone every few months. That we typically do in the off season for bodybuilders or for powerlifters. Where we give them a program and they check in periodically. So we get a good mix. We're rarely dealing with overweight or obese individuals because we advertise ourselves as what we are, which is primarily consulting for strength and physique athletes.
So the people that are coming to you are already in good shape as it is, athletes. You don't really deal with people who are like really out of shape who want to get into shape.
No. I used to when I was a personal trainer for the first 5 or 6 years of my career, but since 2009, since we started 3D Muscle Journey, it's been focused on working with strength and physique athletes.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners they're guys who've been lifting. They just want to gain some muscle and they want to lose some body fat. So I think we can kind of get some idea, from you of some tips, as the show goes on. But go ahead, Trevor. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, Eric, we have a pretty advanced listener base. Most of our listeners have been lifting, 10, 15, 20 years. Most of them are business professionals as well, engineers, lawyers. But going back to my original question. So let's say you said, hey, Trev, I want you to do a 2-week log. So I send you that 2-week log. You average it. And let's say I'm eating, on an average 3,000 calories per day. Now, depending on if I hired you trying to gain 10 pounds or lose 10 pounds, where would you go from there? How would you set up my macronutrients? How would you set up my caloric intake? And then I'm also going to I'd probably send you, I'm guessing you asked for like screenshots of like the 14-day food log. Would you also recommend certain foods? Do you just give out macronutrient breakdowns? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. So when we have our initial application, we're getting not only their current training history and nutrition history, but their preferences, previous stage shots, current pictures of their physique. And then when we initially contact them, it's not just screenshots of their food, but we give them a spreadsheet where they can actually fill out and track their food, so we can get that sent back to us. And then it's a back and forth process. We typically Skype with our clients once that period is complete and set things up. And there's a lot of important things to consider there. You have to consider, you have to look at how their body weight may or may not have changed during that period. And that tells you a lot. So for example, if someone, tracked their nutrition and they were holding steady with their body weight, okay, now we have a good baseline to work from. But if they started tracking and all of a sudden they started losing weight, that tells you something too. That means they're becoming more mindful about their eating. And now they're seeing that a lot of the things that they would normally eat and not track and just kind of not pay attention to or things that they don't really want to record, like, yeah, I did have that donut at work, or instituting enough of a surplus that they were actually, gaining weight or holding heavier than they wanted to be. So you look at the relationship between their energy intake and their body mass changes, and you get an idea of whether or not, or where their maintenance is. So let's say in the example you gave me, this person is on, 3,000 calories and they're holding weight stable, and their goal is to gain weight. Well, first we have to figure out what's an appropriate, amount of surplus to feed them. And how quickly someone can gain weight is going to depend on how long they've been in the gym. How close to their genetic potential are they? So we can assess that to some degree by how old are they, how long have they been lifting, what do their pictures look like, what kind of numbers are they moving in the gym. And overall, that kind of gives the coach some impression based on our experience of, how much further can they go? And that tells us what kind of rate they can gain at. And if you were to look at, studies and just the experience that we have with lifters, the rate at which someone can gain weight, especially as a drug-free lifter, and have that be the majority muscle mass, is not as fast as it's often recommended. So we're looking at maybe putting on, say, 1% of their body weight per month, if they're kind of in that rough intermediate stage. So if this person is, 200 pounds, that's like 2 pounds a month, which means about half a pound a week. So we're only going to put them in like a 200 or 300 calorie surplus to get the job done. So we're probably going to bump them up to around 3,300 calories. And then depending on what their goals are, if they are want to be a competitive bodybuilder, or if they're just looking to put on some muscle mass and feel more confident, and if they're just a recreational lifter, then we might give them a more specific macronutrient breakdown, ensuring that we have adequate carbohydrates and fat. Or I might just tell them, hey, I want you to eat at least this amount of protein, and the carbs and fats can come from the foods you want. And then a big philosophy that we take, because you asked about whether or not we just give macros or whether we give foods, is that if it fits your macros just in and of itself is probably a little too simplistic, and it can lead to an unhealthy relationship with food, especially in someone who is dieting. They're just trying to fit in whatever they can. So we typically recommend a certain number of servings of fruits and vegetables per day, a certain range of fiber intakes, some structure to their diet as far as the number of meals per day they want to eat. So say between 3 to 6, and then some recommendations around peri-workout nutrition, evenly splitting up their protein, and then just letting them know that, hey, you might be someone who struggles to get in enough food. You don't want to eat a lot of really high fiber dense, quote unquote, clean foods if you're struggling to gain weight. Maybe we need to get in some more energy dense stuff, fit a few servings of Mexican food in there, things that you really like to eat that are highly palatable to make it easier to get in calories. On the other hand, if you're someone when you try to gain weight and you gain way too quickly, just because you tend to eat more than we would recommend, maybe we do want to increase the protein a little higher, get more fruits and vegetables, and pack in more, quote unquote, clean foods that will make you more satiated, even though the calories are the same.
When someone comes to you, because it sounds like what you guys do is maybe a little different than, what someone comes to Trevor, for example, or, obviously a personal trainer in person. But when it comes to diet, when they come to you, do you kind of, is it usually totally upending what they're eating? Do you notice? Or is it something where you're just kind of adjusting things a little bit?
That's a great
with the people
question.
that come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you change everything for someone all at once, that can normally really be a barrier to their success. So sometimes they may come to us, especially if they're a competitive bodybuilder or a physique athlete, and they're doing a lot of things right. And it's just a matter of making adjustments and fine tuning things, and maybe taking some restrictions that they might have placed on themselves. I think they can only eat this list of 8 foods, and really in reality, they have a lot more freedom. On the other end of the spectrum. Yeah,
well, on that note, can you give me a specific example maybe of something that happened recently where you had to kind of tweak something that someone could have been doing better? So our listeners can kind of get a little tip from you, pick your brain
Absolutely.
a little bit.
One thing I like to do when I get a bodybuilder who has a very, very rigid concept of what foods they can eat, and that there's this rigid list of good and bad foods, quote unquote, is I'll put something on a sample meal plan for them that would normally be way off of what they think would be okay, like have a Snickers bar. And that's to generate a conversation. Because if they're so restrictive with their diet because they've learned these quote unquote rules that they're only eating sweet potatoes, brown rice, lean chicken, tuna, and an avocado and olive oil, and that's it, then that's something to intervene in right there. So I remember a specific example where I put a Snickers bar on someone's meal plan, expecting them to then freak out. They did. And then we got to have a conversation. And I explained to them that there's really no such thing as a bad food. There's only bad diets, per se. And that no individual food, regardless of its dose or frequency, is going to be harmful to you. And it's more about how you set up the diet. And this person was also someone who would follow a strict carb diet, binge, and then struggle with their relationship with food afterwards. So by making their diet a little more reasoned and having a little more flexibility, we were able to reduce that frequency of occurrence, and they had a much better relationship with food afterwards. So that's one good example, is to don't place rigid restrictions on what foods are allowed. Have more of an inclusionary versus an exclusionary mindset, meaning think about putting in a lot of fruits and vegetables and healthy things. Don't think you need to avoid certain foods that are quote unquote bad, especially in moderation.
So Eric, one question I have for you is, do you work only with natural athletes? And if someone were to be using performance enhancing drugs, how would their program change?
Well, we only work with natural athletes. And if someone is using performance enhancing drugs, we just recommend them to someone else or another coach we trust who has expertise in that area. As far as how it changes, I couldn't speak with authority on that, just because I think in the more than a decade I've been doing this, I've helped 2 folks I knew who were using, who came to me and said, "Hey, I'm using gear. I want to compete in bodybuilding, and can you help me?" And I go, "Hey man, I don't really know nothing about that." But they're like, "Yeah, it's all good. I just need some help on X, Y, and Z." In one case, they were a family friend. In another case, it was just kind of a person who I trusted and I knew. And then compare that to probably 300 to 400 people I've worked with who are drug free. So I can't say I know enough about how the anabolics can affect someone to what degree over different magnitudes. But so yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that.
I train about 50-50, about 50% natural, 50% enhanced. Honestly, all the same principles apply. Steroids increase muscle protein synthesis, so someone who's enhanced can bump up their calories a little bit higher. They can utilize a little bit more protein. If they're going to be using insulin, they can utilize a little bit more carbs. But it's the same rules. People really overcomplicate things. And, me and Steve, we always see these guys are doing like bulking logs and they're gaining like 2 or 3 pounds per week. And, we try to tell them building muscle is a slow process. Like just put this in big picture. There's 51 weeks in a year. Do you really think you're gaining 100 to 150 pounds of muscle in a year? That's impossible, right? Like you'd be training for a year and you'd be bigger than Ronnie Coleman. So, like you said, if you're a new lifter, you might be able to put on 15 to 20 pounds of muscle in a year, but someone who has good lifting experience, even with performance enhancing drugs, 10 pounds of muscle in a year is like pretty much maximal. Is that kind of what you agree with, Eric?
Absolutely. And it so much depends on their experience too. Like I've gotten some, 18-year-olds with great genetics who really do everything right and they can make tremendous gains in a year. But that same person 10 years from now, if they've kept that up, they might not see their stage weight change for a couple years, even though there's small visual improvements, just because of how much it's like watching paint dry or watching grass grow once you've really starting pushing the limits of what you're capable of. And that, makes complete sense. And that echoes everything I've heard of from every other person I know who works with athletes on both sides of the fence, that, principles are principles, and adding in performance enhancing drugs is not going to completely change the game as far as, what makes sense. So yeah, absolutely.
So Eric, one of our listeners sent me a DM. They wanted to know what your current diet and training looks like. They wanted to know, do you follow a pretty structured meal plan, or do you kind of eat different foods every day? Are you on a set workout program, or are you so busy that you kind of just get workouts in when you can? Let our listeners know what type of program you're following right now.
No, I absolutely still take my training and nutrition very seriously, despite how busy I am. And I structure my life around getting into the gym 4 to 6 days per week. So I'm currently on an alternating upper-lower split, primarily directed towards hypertrophy. And I slot those in based on my recovery. I kind of take variable off days. So I might do 6 upper-lower days back to back, or with one day off in a row, but I'm typically hitting everything at least twice per week. And then I alternate each upper and each lower session based on training a little heavier or a little more moderate rep range. And I'm typically doing about 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, depending on the phase of my progression. So typically right now I go from doing 3 sets per exercise to the next week doing 4, to the next week doing 5, at least on the main lift. Some things I don't do. So it's kind of a volume progression, then it drops back down. And I either assess whether I need a deload or not. I take it for up to 1 to 3 days where I just kind of drop the loads and the sets back. And then I restart that process with slightly heavier loads if I can push them up. That's the training side of it. And it's primarily built around, compound barbell lifts with a lot of volume-based accessories, things like a lateral raise or a lat pull down, et cetera. But I train for both powerlifting and bodybuilding. Those have always been my 2 loves. And my nutrition is basically based around, I keep steady track of my body weight. And then I eat to hunger, which is something I wanted to actually talk about, is the long-term change that someone has. It's not like they're always going to be just tracking their macros, but I eat based on my hunger levels, and I am either slightly full, I'm like trying to gain weight so that I can see my scale weight steadily going up, not very quickly, but over the course of a couple of months, I want to see it rise, a pound or 2. if that's my goal at the time. But I don't actively track my macronutrients. I do make sure I get in at least 1.8 grams per kg of protein, which is about 0.8 grams per pound for the American listeners, is kind of a minimum. Happy to go over that. But in the surplus, I think that's probably a good minimum to set. And I try to get in about 3 to 4 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And I eat out maybe once or twice a week. So it's pretty flexible. Definitely something I've developed in over years, though, because there was a period of 5 years straight where I track my macros on a day-to-day basis. Not something I'd recommend, but it was probably very helpful for me to be able to eat like this now today.
Talk to us a little bit about hunger, Eric, because as you know, there's a lot to hunger. There's physical hunger, but there's also emotional hunger. And then also, a lot of people use food when they're dealing with feeling sad, feeling depressed, feeling lonely. So I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about hunger and how you decipher from hunger, physical hunger, and, maybe a mental hunger or just being bored or feeling sad.
It's a great question because, like you said, some people will be stressed and they will stop eating. Some people do the exact opposite. So hunger is something that we've become more and more and more disconnected with just through the modern world, where food is always available. We don't have to work that hard to get it. It's affordable. And largely we eat based on what we think tastes good, not based on the need to survive like we have done for many, many years before that as a species. So it's not surprising that people are disconnected from their hunger. So where I like to get to with my clients is eventually to a point where they can actually use their normal natural signals to help them modify their decisions around food. But they often don't start that way. Typically, in Gen Pop, they will not be able to differentiate between hunger and cravings, like you were saying. And that's a large part of maybe why they're struggling with their body weight and their health. And then on the other side of the spectrum, when you're dealing with the athletes we deal with, a lot of the times they might come to us being very familiar with macro tracking, and they eat completely by the numbers. They ignore their sensations of hunger and just try to hit numbers. On either side of the equation, but for different reasons, you get people who are really bad at assessing what they actually need. So something I try to do on both sides of that spectrum is to try to bring that back in. So for example, with the general population person, having them not only log their food for that 2-week periods, but also log their feelings and their thoughts about when they eat, helps them start to realize the motivations behind when they decide to eat, which is a really useful tool to start keeping track of that on the more Gen Pop side of it. On the bodybuilder physique athlete side of it, yes, obviously during contest prep, your hunger is going to be so out of control, you can't really listen to it. You're going to be physiologically hungry, but if you listen to that, you're not going to get in stage shape. But say for some time in the off season, it's very useful to get away from just eating by the numbers and actually to incorporate some of those signals. So for example, I like to get away from tracking every single food and weighing everything and making sure the person ticks the main boxes of getting an adequate fruits and vegetables, getting an adequate hydration, getting an adequate protein, good meal spread, peri-workout nutrition, and then just making sure that their scale weight is going up at an appropriate rate and using that as feedback with how they're feeling. So for example, if that 200-pound client you talked about, we've been working together for a while, and now 2 years from now, he wants to bulk again, and he goes, right, what should my macros be? I'm going to say, hey, let's just track your body weight this time. I want you to get on the scale, and the goal is we want to gain about half a pound on average, every week, and we'll see what that looks like. And if you find that you can't gain at that rate, I want you to be a little more full after each meal. If you find you're gaining too quickly, I want you to be a little less full at each meal. So it's creating a connection between the objective and body weight and subjective experience of hunger and satiety. And that really helps someone kind of fine tune between that. And that's something I work towards getting my clients to in the off season, but it does take a long time. Sometimes I've had clients who we go primarily by the numbers for years before we get to that point. So a lot of people will call that quote unquote intuitive eating. I think it's more about habit development because that clearly wasn't their initial intuition. If intuitive eating worked, then we wouldn't have the obesity epidemic, because people are just eating what they want at the moment. And that's problematic, at least in the United States for the most part.
So I'm going to ask one more question and let Steve chime in because I want Steve to ask you a little bit about intermittent fasting. What would you do for someone like me? Like I'm like a 5-year-old who's more interested in playing than finishing their dinner. I could literally go the whole day without eating and not even notice it because like I wake up, I got 50 text messages. I got 100 emails. I got all the participants from my research study sending me emails, like, and I can literally just like sit and go. So what would you do for someone in my situation, or someone else who they're a bottomless pit? You know, they're like a dog who will literally eat until they get sick.
You know, funny thing is the answer to both is structure, but structure created around different goals. And I totally relate to someone who's so busy and naturally someone who doesn't put on weight very easily and kind of sits a little leaner, in that, you know, I might, if I wake up and I just start working and I don't pay attention to it, and if it's like I wasn't a bodybuilder, I'm thinking back to before I started even lifting, I could go almost the whole day without eating, and then the next day I'd smash a large pizza. You know, I'd spend the whole day playing Halo and forgetting to eat, kind of thing. That's how I grew up. So the way I manage that now, and with clients who are like that, is we set up a structure to help them put a lot of calories in a convenient way. So it might be something as simple as, you know, getting them a blender so they can make smoothies first thing in the morning. And they wake up, throw a bunch of stuff in there, blend it up, throw some scoops of protein in there, and then encourage them to eat out on a semi-regular basis, because that way it takes less effort, it takes less time, it's easy to put down, and then just having to focus on maybe one meal a day that they actually prep, like dinner, and then just bringing a protein bar with them a couple other times per day. So they're getting those 4 protein servings, and they can have a nice energy-dense shake in the morning, you know, grab lunch while they're out and about doing their thing, and then so long as they can sit down and make a healthy dinner, and we can make sure we include all the micronutrients while also getting in a high calorie amount to gain weight throughout that day. And we can always sneak in more calorie dense things into to that shake in the morning, or, you know, add more stuff to the dinner to get us there as well. But that kind of structure, that backbone, is really critical when in someone in that first scenario. And for the bottomless pit as well, the answer is structure. And sometimes doing things that make it easier for them to forget about food. One thing you'll typically see is the people who, like you said, can go the whole day and realize, oh shit, I haven't eaten breakfast. They're busy. And the bottomless pits tend to have a lot of excursions and recreation built around foods. You know, they go out, they have their favorite coffee shop they go to every morning. They like to get dessert at this place, and they keep this one thing they buy from the store in their cupboard. So changing some of those behaviors around a little bit, focusing more on the social interaction versus the actual food they're eating, and maybe just not having certain things in the house, and, you know, having structured meal times that aren't just like, oh, I'm always aware of and have the foods I like available to me. Both of those things can really help that person shift around so that they can gain it at a more appropriate rate, either faster in that first case or slower in that second case. And you can also do other things like shift the macronutrients around. So emphasize a lot more fruits and vegetables and protein in the latter example. You know, if you tell them you got to have a scoop of whey before each meal, you'd be surprised at what that can do to someone's satiety of the meal. Or that they have to get in at least 5 servings of green vegetables and 5 fruits per day. That just tends to eat up a lot of their desire to eat. You know, that can make a big dent there. So some of those behavioral tactics can be very useful in either one of those cases.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because my rule is I only buy about a day and a half worth of food to fit my calories. And then once I run out of that food, I don't eat. so that's kind of my rule, and that's kind of helped me stick to my calories. But it's easy to do that when you live alone, so it's probably a lot harder. I have to get if I ever live with someone again, I'll have to get a lock for the refrigerator. I have them put a lock so I can't get in there.
The combo lock on the fridge, I like that. Yeah.
So Trevor wanted to talk a little about intermittent fasting. Do you know much about that? You implement that?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about
I have. Yeah. So intermittent fasting is primarily, it's known in different ways. If you're kind of reading like scientific literature, that could mean anything from being fasted for part of a day to a whole day or longer. If you're on the internet and you're primarily aware of IF, you're probably familiar with the concept promoted by Martin Berkhan originally that has really kind of caught fire, where you've got maybe a 14 or 16 hour period where you're fasted and you eat in roughly in an 8 hour period. So it kind of looks for most people like skipping breakfast and having a late lunch and then, you know, finishing meals around dinner and then going to bed. You know, I would say that this was a really kind of earth-shattering concept when it first came out in the early 2000s, when we were all programmed to eat every 3 hours, and we were taught that we had to stoke the metabolic furnace, and that if we didn't get our post-workout shake in, we shouldn't have even worked out. I think it was really good to see a lot of people make a lot of success, for the most part, following intermittent fasting, just kind of making us realize that maybe these timing distribution aspects of nutrition aren't quite as important as the total amount of calories, the macronutrient breakdown, and the overall habits you form. So I think intermittent fasting works really well for some people, but it does not work very well for others. I've ran into a lot of people who are starving first thing in the morning, and they feel absolutely awful by the time they actually get to eat. And intermittent fasting is a lot harder. But I've met a lot of young guys who wake up, they're not hungry, and they're totally fine, and they don't even think about food until noon anyway. So I think it can definitely be a useful strategy if you find that you're forcing yourself to eat first thing in the morning. And if you find that you can be more productive and stay on task if you've got a lot to do, especially I know your audience includes a lot of businessmen and professionals in general. Like if you feel like lunch is an interruption and you'd rather just skip it and have something a little later, I think that can work. I also want to say, though, that intermittent fasting isn't magic, and it also doesn't need to be followed really strictly. Like if you have some calories in that 16-hour fasting period, it's not like it quote unquote doesn't work anymore. It's largely there just to help you contain and put constraints around when you eat, which normally results in a controlled calorie intake. It's really hard to eat in a surplus when you're only eating 8 hours per day. But you can do things to help you maintain more muscle mass if you're trying to cut, or gain muscle mass more effectively if you're using an intermittent fasting strategy while trying to gain weight, which I wouldn't recommend normally, but you can do it. And that's just to simply maybe have something first thing in the morning, even if that's just one scoop away. That way you can get kind of this multiple boluses of protein throughout the day, which is probably a better idea than just going a full 16 hours without eating. So it's kind of having your cake and eating it too. It's not cake, but it's a protein shake, is where you have a very small amount of food versus a full meal. And that's kind of the way I eat, not full blown, but I'm just never that hungry first thing in the morning. So my breakfast is normally, a Quest bar and then a piece of fruit. It's not that much. And then I eat progressively larger meals throughout the day just because that's my normal hunger, schedule, you could say.
Yeah, I do intermittent fasting 3 to 4 times a week. And then the other times of the week, like this morning, I did eat breakfast, and then, I rolled the rest of the day. And then tomorrow I'm going to intermittent fast, and then I'm going to work out around noon, and then I'll have my first meal after the workout. And that strategy really works for me. I think ectomorphs, the intermittent fasting thing doesn't work as well. But I also think too, people who are more, on the verge of type 2 diabetes or insulin, resistant, tend to have a problem, like you were saying, with energy and stuff. Because I used to be that way. And I used to not be able to go long periods without food, but I had to push myself to do it. And then that switch went off. And then now I have no problem, like, not eating. Like I'll fast 24 hours. I'll fast days. I did a 19-day fast, prolonged fast. So it wasn't even an issue. So it's definitely like something that, I really like. I know Trevor's not a fan of it. So maybe you guys can kind of debate that a little bit. Trevor, what are your thoughts?
I never said I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting. I just think it's kind of the latest fad. All intermittent fasting does, which Eric basically summarizes, that it helps restrict calories. So you could get the same effect by just eating less at each meal. So people kind of think that there's this magic thing that occurs when you don't eat for 14 or 16 hours.
But I mean, my counter to that is autophagy. You're not counting autophagy, the cell regeneration. You're also not counting what I was saying tomorrow, that I'm not going to eat, then work out. My workouts are fantastic in a fast. They would never be that good if I was to eat like a steak or something before a fast. So in that aspect, it's not the same. That's my counter argument to that. What do you think, Eric?
I'll say one thing, then we'll let Eric go. So again, it's all about making the program fit the person and not vice versa. Everyone's different. If you look at the cell regeneration properties of fasting, that doesn't really start until you've been fasting, for 48 hours or longer. But what you said about feeling more energized is actually true, because, you have your rest and digest and your fight and flight energy system. So if you have a lot of food in your stomach, your body's not going to properly release adrenaline, endorphins, things like that during your workout. So that's why you want to eat a light meal before your workout. But if you're eating something that's not going to be too heavy on your digestive system, it's not going to affect your body's fight or flight response. But Eric, I'd love to hear what you think about that, because, you know, especially with the whole bulletproof coffee, there's people who are diehard intermittent fasters, right? And it's something they will never stop doing. So what are your thoughts on what Steve said?
I think I think there's a big difference between demystifying something and then debunking it, right? So I don't think fasting needs to be debunked. It can certainly be an effective tool to result in caloric restriction. And, you know, like Steve's experience, he's done it a lot. He's probably going to keep doing it, and it's probably been effective for him, you know, and I think he's not alone in that experience. But, you know, I wouldn't say that a fasting protocol is like snake oil. It's not something that we need to go like, hey, this is a myth. This is something that we need to let go of, because in the end, like Steve was talking about, and you were talking about as well, it's probably not realistic to ask everyone on the planet just to get a food scale, a body weight scale, a MyFitnessPal account, and just track their food, right? What might be more effective is, okay, what ways can we help people manage their caloric intake so that they aren't sliding towards obesity and they aren't unhealthy? And if fasting can be used as a tool for that, if time is the issue, and if they find that drawing hard lines in the sand with what periods they can and can't eat, then I think that can be helpful. And for some people that will work, and may even work in the long term. The times I've seen it be potentially negative, because, you know, all things we have to consider the pros and cons, are where I've seen people with borderline eating disorders who are trying to control that and manage that with fasting. And essentially what they're doing is they're giving themselves license to binge in those meals, where like they know they can't control how much they eat. So they know if they can only get 1 or 2 binges per day, they're not in the surplus. So that's what they have. That's definitely not the norm. And I don't want people who appreciate and use and fasting successfully to think I'm saying that's what you're doing. But I have definitely seen it. And it's actually exacerbating their relationship with food in a negative way, keeping control over it, but not really addressing the root of the problem. So I think it's a multifaceted issue, and I think it can be used as a tool, but I definitely don't think it's magic. You know, what we understand about autophagy and some of the cellular effects is not that clear, and we don't have solid data that it's necessarily better than caloric restriction anyway. So yeah, I think also if you're going to compare eating a steak to eating nothing pre-workout, then yeah, probably eating nothing is going to win every time. But if, like you said, if you're going to have a scoop away in an apple to compare to nothing, that will probably have a similar effect, or sometimes better, depending on what that workout looks like, how long you haven't been eating, and the individual. Because some people do better without eating anything prior to training. So I think that should be individually assessed.
Yeah, definitely. Like 10 years ago, there's no way I could have done that. So we don't have much time. I kind of want to get in more in training. When I'm at the gym, I notice a lot of people, we asked our last guest this question too, but I notice a lot of people are in the gym when I show up and they're in the gym when I leave, and they look like shit. They haven't made progress in forever. And, you know, one of the things I know is I don't really like stalk people at the gym or care what they're doing, but I notice the intensity is shit. You know, let's face it, like they're playing on their phone, they're stalking women and stuff like that. So I'm kind of I handle my business, I leave, I don't really socialize or anything. You know, what are some of the mistakes people are doing in the gym that you notice when you go to the gym that people need to correct if they're going to have success long-term and short-term?
You know, it's funny you say that, because for a huge chunk of my career, I've trained in powerlifting gyms, private studios that, you know, I have the key to, where I'm a trainer, or most recently an Olympic lifting gym. So I'm surrounded by people doing things not always perfectly, but at least with a high level of effort and purpose. And like I mentioned to you guys, I've been doing this upper lower bodybuilding split. So I've been going to a commercial gym to supplement a lot of my kind of barbell work that I do in the Olympic lifting gym. And I forgot just how much craziness you see. And by craziness, I don't mean like people throwing up and killing themselves. I mean like looking at their phone in the middle of a set, you know, or having like the plate is making a weird noise because it's not actually plugged in. Like they're just at the base plate, and like the cylinder won't even go in the hole effectively. And you're right. They might be there for multiple hours, but they've done no effective work. So I think the main thing that people aren't doing is that they aren't training hard enough. And it's the opposite of what most hardcore athletes are doing, which is they're training too hard, and you can find a way to be more efficient with that. But it's the exact opposite message for the general public. When I go to the gym, most of the time I'm seeing people completing sets maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 reps away from failure. Now there's a time and a place to stop short of failure, like 1 or 2 or 3 reps, especially if you're training for powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, or if you're training with a high frequency program, et cetera. But when you're in the gym maybe 2-3 times a week and you're general pop and you're just trying to get fit, that time needs to be well spent. And I think training near to or close to failure when you're only in there once or twice per week is probably required to get the most out of your time. I was talking to a relative recently who was like, hey, I've tried following X number of different programs, doing this and that. What should I do? And I said, look, just go to the gym twice per week, and I want you to choose a circuit of machines, and I just want you to do 1 set to failure that ends somewhere in the 8 to 20 rep range. Just start there, because that gives you the maximum return on investment. I'm not saying everyone should train to failure. I think most bodybuilders probably should hold back from failure so they can get more volume in, but train near to it. But for the general pop people out there, just putting in more effort and probably having someone help you to actually train with good form, I think those 2 things would fix so much. Just having someone, spending maybe 2 weeks with a trainer just to really improve your form so you're safe, and then actually spending some time training to failure so you know where it's at, so you can actually see how much you're really capable of, I think would make a huge difference for most people.
I one time saw a guy eat a Subway sandwich while doing curls. He had the sandwich in one hand, and on the other hand he was doing curls. So he'd finish his right arm, and then he'd put the sandwich on his right hand and then do curls on his left arm. I was pretty impressed, actually.
Yeah, I'm not even mad. This person, I think, deserves some kind of award. That's hard to do. That's pretty.
You
impressive.
never know. Maybe he's got a full-time job. He's got kids, and the only time he could go was on his lunch break. So he was killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Maybe
so I never judge.
No, because he watched Jared in the commercials, and he wants to go from super obese to just obese by eating Subway, and it probably works, right?
So Eric, we got about 5 minutes left. There's one listener question that I wanna ask you. For full disclosure, don't feel like we're singling you out, because he asked Skip LaCour the same question. You have an impressive physique. You're a natural professional bodybuilder. What prevented you from ever using steroids? Didn't you feel the lure to, get on performance enhancing drugs and try to win like an IFBB pro card or take it to the next level? Why did you stay natural?
That's a great question. And I think I don't know that I've ever talked to a bodybuilder who's legitimately never considered using anabolic steroids or performance enhancing drugs. And I certainly did as well. I think for me, it was a matter of thinking about, what is my motivation to do this? Why am I doing this? Am I trying to be, as big as the planet, or to win an IFBB pro card, or to get as huge as I possibly can? And I realized that for me, I wanted bodybuilding to enhance my life, and that I really appreciated the cultural aspect of it, and the focus on hard work, and the things that it taught me that I brought outside of the gym, about being resilient, having dedication, desire, discipline, and having ownership and agency in my life. So I knew that I was a competitive person, and that if I was to go the enhanced side, if I was training as hard as I possibly could, if I was following my diet and I wasn't being successful, what's the only thing left to manipulate, at least in most bodybuilders' minds, is to up the dose. And I don't know where that ends. I think at a certain point, you can make arguments that moderate usage of anabolic steroids can be at least not harmful. But once you get to the point where you're never going off and you're stacking multiple drugs and you're taking research stuff that has never really been assessed and stacked, we're pretty sure that's not healthy. And it's not something that one would do if they have a holistic view and they want to be healthy in the long run and they want to be lifting for a lifetime. I don't judge people to do it, but for me, I knew I needed some kind of line in the sand that I wouldn't cross. And the easy way to do that, once I got exposed to natural bodybuilding, was to go, right, sweet, I've got a rule now. I've got, like lines that I won't cross so that I don't get in my own way and do something stupid in the long run. So it was a useful way for me to put constraints around myself to kind of contain the competitive animal inside of me. All the things that have come out of bodybuilding.
I'm the exact same way, Eric. Most type A personalities are very extreme and have very addictive personalities. So, I mean, I remember, being in high school and people would talk about, oh, Coke is so cool. But I knew, like, with my addictive personality, if I tried that, I'd probably get hooked. So I purposely stayed completely straight-laced, like, only drank alcohol because I just knew, like, just don't even go there. That's a chapter I shouldn't even open. Mm-hmm. Steve, do you have any closing questions for Eric? And then I'll close up the show.
Yeah, just because you mentioned a holistic approach. What do you mean by that exactly? Does that mean that you eat organic, you do yoga? What is the extent of that? I'm just curious. Because I do all that shit myself. I don't consider it a holistic approach. I guess I'm a hippie. I don't know.
No. So yeah. I think it's funny. Holistic kind of means something different when you talk to someone just on the street. When I mean holistic, I mean looking at the big picture, true holism. So like thinking about what makes me happy? What are my internal motivations? What do I want to be doing when I'm in my 60s and 70s? And how does bodybuilding impact my life? Things like seeing myself as, where does my self-worth come from? Not just purely from being a bodybuilder. I don't think that is healthy. So why would I sacrifice other things to make bodybuilding better? It doesn't line up with my core beliefs, if that makes sense. So for me, it's looking at the big picture was what I mean by holistic. Although I have taken a yoga class here and there for sure.
Steve, Eric, finish off the show letting us know what's on the current agenda for you. Are you currently prepping for a show in the upcoming future? Are you writing a book? What are you currently working on?
So I'm working on the second edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, which are my ebooks, to kind of update things with the latest science that's come out in the last couple of years since they were written. I'm also going to be actually leaving tomorrow to go to Toronto. I'm going to be working with the Kaizen team, which is Omar Isuf, Silent Mike, and Bart Kwan, and we're going to develop a nutrition course, which we've been keeping on wraps for the most part, but now that I figure I'm going to go with that, that's going to be pretty cool. And then I am training to probably get back on stage in 2019. It's the first time I've been on stage since my graduate work, which I was on stage last in 2011. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, that's the big focus. Is we've also got the lifting library coming out for 3D Muscle Journey, where we're actually doing videos of common lifts that are misperformed by bodybuilders, and with like audio commentary and visual aids and notes, so people can really improve their practice of lifting to go along with like the more theoretical information in my books.
For any of our listeners who are interested in learning more about your ebooks and purchasing them, what would be the best place for them to go?
muscleandstrengthpyramids.com. That's the place to go.
muscleandstrengthpyramids.com. For your host, Trevor Kouritzin, for my co-host, Steve Smee, and for our special guest, Eric Helms, this has been another episode of Evolutionary Radio. Live your life, look good doing it. Thanks for listening.